Okay, hello everybody and welcome. Today is April 8th of 2020. This is the API Machinery SIG meeting. Every 2 weeks we run this meeting. We have a nice agenda today. I hope everybody's doing well and healthy in your countries and homes. Crazy times we are living. So without any further delay, we should start going through the agenda. Thank you for to everybody that put your items here. Daniel, do you want to start talking a little bit about this one?
Yeah, sure. And this seems to be our occasional meeting where we talk about what we're going to do for the next release. That's the theme here for everything, basically. I think the first few are mine. So priority and fairness, we talked a bit about beta requirements and decided to go for like stability and observability rather than feature completeness. I think it's more important to get the thing that we have running in clusters than it is to finish off all the features we want to add. So yeah, if you look at the blocking items here, right now are improving observability. So metrics, we want to add a debug endpoint, so you can go to like a status page that shows you the current state of the queues, basically. We need to have a mechanism to turn off client-side rate limiting so that it's easy to demonstrate the feature is working correctly. We think that is good for beta. We've run a test temporarily where I ran an E2E test and just turned off client-side rate limiting completely, but it doesn't seem like we can actually just do that. So it needs to be a choice. We need an E2E test. And then if we get more computers or more time, the obvious missing features are long-running requests. We want this to manage also. We want list requests to have different levels of service depending on how many items they request and whether or not they're paginated. Right? We want to encourage the use of paginated list requests. And yeah, I think that is, we also, right now you can only specify relative, like you ask for some number of concurrency shares and then the system computes a actual concurrency value for that priority level based on how large the machine is that the API server is running. Actually, it's based off of a flag, but most people set that based on how large the machine is. There's a request to be able to configure a specific value, a concurrency value for a priority level, so that even if you run API server on larger or smaller machines, you get exactly the concurrency you ask for. But those are not blocking. Yeah, so I think that covers this. Any questions about API priority and fairness? Did I miss anything, David?
Something we talked about a while ago but didn't get written down in this list yet was auto-tuning the total concurrency limit on the server.
I definitely see that as GA at best, probably post GA in my mind.
Oh yeah, I certainly wouldn't put it in blocking. I just thought.
Yeah, I think that is. Blocking. I think that is, and eventually very important to make because we should be able to set it better than any human can configure it. But that's not on our list right now.
Right, I was just trying to suggest for the non-blocking items, maybe it's just a list of not even now, but things to not forget. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to build like an auto-tuning system on top of an API that isn't yet GA. That might just be me being a little gun shy, but when I think about investment in auto-tuning, I really want to be building on top of something.
Certainly, I was not trying to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, we would need to have a discussion about that anyway, because the way I was thinking that would work is like a feedback loop within API server itself that just watches like etcd latency or something. Yeah, okay. Should we go to the next item?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Which is also mine, and it's about expanding explaining the apply working group into covering more aspects of API expression is what we called it. So there's been a lot of open items that we discuss occasionally and haven't acted on. Like I remember an old Fieldgates proposal. How should we specify APIs? Are we all happy with our types.go files and Go code with comments that have markup? Should we find a better way to do it? How should we document fields? How should we document the update patterns for users who want to evolve their APIs? Like, I want to add a field. Is that safe? What do I need to do? I started out with a single thing, and it turns out that I needed multiple of those things. How do I pluralize the field? How do I do that? Is it safe to remove a field? Do I need to make a new API version? What are the requirements for my conversion functions? So there's like just a bunch of questions along this line of thinking that many of which we answered for built-in APIs. Maybe not the best answer or the clearest answer, but there is a large document that people may read or may not. But we need to be more systematic about it and document it for CRDs and basically, yeah. So the idea is making the working group gives a place for this work to go, and it's kind of a joint project between SIG architecture and ourselves, and it's also the next step or the maybe post GA task for server-side apply, because that gives us the choke point to implement all of the like validation and like schema enforcement things. That gives us a piece of code that both built-in APIs and CRDs go through. So one place to do all this. So that's why it makes sense to expand the scope of the server-side applies working group. That was a lot of words. Maybe I should let people ask questions.
I have one additional comment I'd like to put on here. I remember making, yeah, and I can even see it right there. Certain really significant changes, if the group proposes a change, they are going to be expected to implement it.
Yes, that's the intention. Is that like
not a vision group? Well, it is a vision group, but it's also like if your vision requires a lot of change, you're going to be signing up for some of that change.
Yes, it is a place for discussing things, but also it is a place for people who actually want to do stuff. And creating recommendations that don't have people willing to go out and execute, then maybe we should come up with a vision that will actually attract people.
Yeah, and from counting the items, we definitely need the people.
Yeah, but
hey,
there's also
one quick question.
Sure.
May I? So we are adding a working group API expression. I haven't went through the agenda as well. So maybe do you mind just a brief of 1 minute, how it is and what's different than the CRD and actual API? So how does the working group fits in as the current API structure? It's like new grouping or new kind we are adding to the API, right?
It's more about how do you shape an API to acknowledge the fact that APIs change over time and have a way to make controlled changes to an API over time that is minimally impactful to consumers of it.
Okay. Thanks for explaining that.
Mm-hmm. And it's a hard problem. So.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say that this also provides a place to specifically discuss these topics. The API Machinery SIG is a little broader than just this, so this is a more focused place for people interested in working on this and people interested in consuming the output of this to meet. So I think that's why it's important to have an official working group for these items.
How can people join it? How can people be in the meetings?
I think we're reusing the existing apply working group time slot. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yeah, we made it half an hour longer because we always run out of time, and it's the same meeting, and it's in the global calendar now. And once we merge, we also update the Zoom meeting, I think, if I get access, but I think I can't get access, as Antoine told me. So we'll see.
Yeah, we're still figuring out the
that's on me.
Details. And that's Tuesday mornings, 9:30 Pacific time. Is that correct?
I don't know Pacific time. It's around the same time as now, so I think.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. I think it's earlier.
And currently it's all 2 weeks. Like this meeting, I don't guess we need more for now, but we'll see. So.
Yeah. Okay. And hopefully we can have a agenda document. I think Apply already had one, or we can add the items we want to discuss because there's so many items that we'll need to organize the discussion.
Yeah, we have the new way we organize our work items. And
yeah, I believe that's actually
come
linked
up with an
next.
agenda.
Yeah. Okay. Any more discussion on this?
No. If anybody has any question, I'm highlighting Kevin's GitHub and Slack, so you can contact him.
Is this going to be a new Slack channel? Basically, in the Slack, would this be a different, like SIG API Machinery, similarly?
Yeah, once the PR is merged, we get a new channel, and the work group apply channel should get archived, but I'm not sure about that. No, we have to change it. But yeah, there will be a Slack channel for it.
So when you were mentioning about we need more people to work into this group, do we have like a plan how we want to go with and what kind of like works we have which we already know about?
You mean getting people or?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I heard from Antoine, I think that we might get some more people, but that's all I know. We probably have to do some advertising, which we do here right now, I think.
Are you asking if there's like tasks that are ready to go?
Yeah, or get involved to and start working towards.
I think let's take this topic to that forum. I think it's
we have some applied topics that need help, and that's the first thing we'll probably continue because it's work in progress.
Yeah, which is actually the very next item. So maybe we should go look at those. I think I linked them. Here.
Oh, okay.
I'm opening it.
So these are the work items that are chosen for from the server-side apply effort. The items for 1.19. We're not going to GA at 1.19, but maybe we can consider this like a release candidate 1. I don't know. Kevin, is that a reasonable?
That seems reasonable because it's about people actually using it.
Yeah.
Finally, so that fits. Yeah, and we got a few items where help would be needed. I think the one major is the API clients. Like currently we can't do because we lack resources, but would be valuable for people to actually use apply.
Yeah.
Just thank you. That's something people are aware of here. The client here is referring to like a code client that you use inside of a controller, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote up I was going to talk about that in a minute instead of right now, but we can talk about it right now. I wrote up a document with some options. Oh no, that's not the right one. That's not the right document. I'll find the right document.
So when we are saying, sorry, when we are saying client and controllers, it means that controller manager and scheduler we are talking about, mainly controller manager maybe.
Well, I think we want to make a client that'll work for anyone, but yes, I do think that those are important.
Yeah, if it won't work for existing controllers, then we should probably take that as a bad sign, right?
Yeah, a little concerning.
Yeah, so I have a different document, not the one linked there. I'll find the correct link and fix it. Outline some things, but yeah, that's actually a rather hard task. So I don't think it's a good first task for somebody, but I am looking for someone to help out on that. Antoine, are you on the call? Do you have anything to add?
I don't think he's here.
He's busy.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we should just briefly go over the things that are on this list, just so people know what they are. At the very top, and I agree with this, is the optimizing the transition from client-side apply. People are using client-side apply in the kube control to help them smoothly switch over to using server-side apply. This is maybe our largest open issue. Is around surprises when you do that. So we want to make that very smooth for people.
So would you like to brief a little bit on the server-side apply?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
I was saying that would you mind a little bit briefing what changes we will be doing, or what little bit maybe what's basically lacking in the client side versus server side?
More specifically, what the items are?
No, we were saying that we are transitioning from the client side to server side for the kubectl apply, right?
Yeah, we're working on making it smooth. Right now, you get to choose one or the other.
Okay.
So I don't know, Kevin. Do you want to give more detail on?
Yeah, I think it was muted. I think he was asking for a difference, and currently applies is a kubectl thing, and you can't really use it in code other than calling kubectl, which is a bit frustrating if you want to apply stuff. So server-side apply is moving the merging and applying process to the server and offering also field ownership and resolving the conflicts resulting from different people applying. So that's the whole project goal, to move away from a client-side apply mechanism.
Yeah. Actually, Antoine wrote a nice blog post on this for the Kubernetes blog, which may be of interest. Yeah, I think that's the major thrust, and it seems like a good one. There's some other resources, but we don't have to spend all of our time on this, unless people are super interested. Anyway, you can follow the link to this document and add comments there, or show up at the meeting.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think the next three items are David.
Yeah. So similar to Daniel, these are the things that we're going to be pushing forward in 119. Some of it's related to stuff we've already talked about. So priority and fairness, there's an aspect of having to be able to configure clients to do that and test it effectively. So there's a concrete proposal for how to do that with a kubeconfig file that I think should fit into 119. There's a link there, but basically it would be, an additional piece in the config inside the user standa, and then you would just have that, and then have a common way to specify QPS and burst. Then the next one is related to status conditions. This one is, I'll admit, actually just a personal pet peeve. Our code is really inconsistent in how we define these conditions. Like, everyone has them, but they're all just a little bit different between optional fields and required fields. And it makes it difficult to have standard library methods to interact with them, which is a little annoying. And then people will often think, well, I have a slightly better condition. So you see re-implementations of things like heartbeats, where you can look at it, you'll find it, and you'll just go, no! We did heartbeats once, and we crushed our API server. And so if you want to talk about what that API should look like, that's the KEP to come in and talk about it in. I'm trying to keep it focused on, at least initially, what is common across basically all the conditions we have. And Daniel's had a couple ideas for extending it. I'd like to get the common stuff in first and then talk about the extensions. Well, because some I agree with and some I less agree with.
Yeah, I think one of my suggestions was more important than the other. I agree with that.
And then finally, we merged the required transition from beta cap. So that merged last week, the week before, somewhere in there. For those of you that remember, this is the cap that said a beta API has a defined lifespan. 18 months after it's introduced, it will be deleted. And halfway through that, it will be deprecated. You get to either try to promote it or just do a second beta. So this is not like you must go to GA. You can just have a second beta, but the point here is to clearly indicate to users that beta APIs are like work is happening here and open to change and growth. I'm actually going to be working on some client or some code generator enforcement tools to make this something that we can enforce in code during review and by bot, obviously. And also eventually enforce inside of our actual REST handlers. Some of the work that led up to this, like Jordan's effort to get conformance to not depend on beta APIs, was important for those later objectives.
That's cool.
Hey, when we say conformance to not depend on beta API, what does that mean? It means that the features which are in beta, the conformance would no longer be subject to that, or not basically taken care of.
A beta feature cannot be part of conformance. That's the rule.
Okay.
Yeah, you should be able to pass the conformance tests without having any beta features turned on. Only GA features.
Okay, so it's optional. If we can turn on, then it will take care.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
you're permitted to have beta features on, but you shouldn't be required to have beta features on to pass conformance.
right, and conformance will never add a beta API to a conformance test. So both sides of that equation. A beta API is not allowed to be part of the conformance suite.
Yeah, so that's where I was getting confused that, let's say going forward 1.2.0 or something, are we saying that whatever the conformance test we will be as a community we will be adding, we will never be adding the beta one?
We will never add beta features to conformance until those features go to GA, at which point the tests that we should have already created can get promoted to conformance for newer versions of Kubernetes.
Okay, so it will also not be part of like optional, or will it be optional if somebody wants to enable beta one in their tests?
Conformance is a subset of tests. You can absolutely add a test that tests a beta feature.
You absolutely should add a test that tests.
You absolutely must add.
Yeah, you must.
Yeah.
But we will never put a beta feature test into the conformance suite. We will only put
Yeah.
GA. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I got it.
It's super unlikely that something will go straight to conformance without having had a beta test previously, right? Like otherwise, how would you know that it's working? You need to be able to pass the test before we add them to the conformance suite.
Yeah, that is why I was getting scary in my thought, like understanding, like what? No, that's good. Thank you.
All right, I think that's the end of the items that we had. We can take a couple minutes for open discussion before we give everybody back their time.
I'm going to admit I don't have a ton of knowledge on how the server-side apply works, but I was just curious if there's any changes to how audit logging would be reported for when the server-side apply is executed.
So server-side apply caches out into either an update or a creation request. And so the audit logging will observe either an update or a creation request.
Okay. Is there any information about, like, does a server-side apply restrict certain fields from being changed, and would the audit log indicate that, like, a controller was hitting fields that it's not supposed to change?
It's not a security mechanism, so, or at least it's not currently a security mechanism. So no, that wouldn't be a thing. It is there is something similar in which, like, if multiple people have set aspects of an object and somebody tries to set something that somebody else has set, they'll get a conflict, but it is advisory and you can choose to ignore those. So yeah, it basically has no security implications. It should have no security implications or audit or anything like that.
Yeah, and requests still go through the same admission chain and things like that.
So on a related note, I found this over the weekend. I didn't realize this, but every event on the system gets all fields called out as being owned by whatever the last controller was that wrote it. So I had triggered that in the working group, and we're going to talk about it more. Events is a somewhat unique object where ownership of fields doesn't make sense with the semantic of the object necessarily. And also it doubles the size of every event, which isn't great for not really helping the use case. So
yeah, that's probably, it probably makes sense to set the highest level section of event to just atomic. So there'd be one owner for everything instead of an owner for each field, which is all the same.
And there's probably a couple of other objects out there in like the aggregated API ecosystem that also have these semantics. So it was a good opportunity just to talk through it. Certainly, I was thinking about a few that this could come up in where I hadn't really thought about the implications of an object going through an aggregated API and then also having managed fields under the underlying object. And so that's not common, but that's something that just to think through that I also wanted to review the objects out there in the wild.
Yeah, so we actually anticipate that we anticipate that there's going to be a bunch of like schema fixes like that we might want to fix up either for smaller data or just because it makes more sense. So I think one of the items on that list is thinking about the implications of changing a schema tag, like changing that top level thing to atomic. Does that cause any negative repercussions? Things like its events, so almost certainly not, but maybe for other objects we need to think about it more carefully. But yeah, the goal is to get into a state where it's safe for us to improve our schema over time, or at least that's my goal.
As it just was mentioned, are audit logs working comparable to events and also are owned by the creator? So might we have to think about those as well? I don't know how audit logs work, but it sounds like it.
Audit logs aren't any type of persisted object, so there isn't actually an owner on it. One thing I guess I was wondering is there a way to externally observe that two controllers are fighting over ownership of a field?
Watch.
So if you've got two controllers that are both trying to set the same field, if you were watching the object, you would be seeing, you could observe that.
Yeah, I don't think it's any different than today. Like if two controllers fight over a field today, this isn't a security measure. It is also not a stop people fighting over fields measure. It allows better detection of it potentially in the future, for sure.
That's what I was thinking, more along the lines of those. As this becomes as you're pushing it to GA, is there a way that we can audit whether controllers are behaving properly? Or if there's some overlap there that might be an underlying design thing.
Yeah, I think it is maybe an interesting follow-up. I mean, this isn't really the purpose of the feature, but it might be an interesting follow-up to talk about, like, could we put in a field set and lock those fields and make it impossible for others to override conflicts? It may be worth a discussion. I don't know that anybody has a pressing need for that. But yeah, it does seem like a possible extension of this feature.
I realized I did a cat hiss on mute accidentally, but I was doing a cat hiss in the background. Certainly, I'm actually really excited to see how people use this. And I think we have historically underinvested in the Cube community and encouraging tools that allow visualization of the changes that are happening. Like Audit was one, but like there's a number of tools out there that watch objects. David and McCall had prototyped something that turns like object watches into Git changes so that you could build like a history there for like debugging. And there's a couple of tools out there in the ecosystem that attempt to do this, like watch all the objects, put them in like a look-aside DB and visualize them. It might be some time for us to maybe like suggest like these debugging tools might be things that we could support or endorse in the ecosystem to get some more effort around them.
Yeah, one thing
there was a presentation some time ago during SIG CLI from, I'll try to find the link and I'll put it in the agenda, about distributed tracing systems and how we could inject additional information inside of kubectl commands that are then persisted throughout lifetime of a request, so that you can actually trace how the requests
I think we had a demo of that a few meetings ago.
Yeah, you might have had that one as well. It was also presented at SIG CLI. It's definitely something that it's definitely worthwhile to add a lot larger scale across all of the SIGs, I guess, because it would be nice to see how a request goes, or a particular resource is being created all the way from user, all the way down to being scheduled and placed on a particular node, and how it interacts with the node.
Yeah, I think that is more relevant at the like object level, and server-side apply is more individual fields. So maybe there's some interaction, but I think it's mostly separate. I could be wrong. I was just going to say one potentially very interesting use for managed fields is to reproduce the export behavior, like give you only the parts of the object that you deliberately set. I think that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, picture me making the cat hiss.
So in general, we have lost something from what we don't really have tools that make it super easy to watch holistically what's going on. I don't know that it's our job to do all of it, but it definitely should be our job to make sure that those projects are successful by having well-reasoned APIs for managing, for understanding the state of the system as it changes.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to return someone the metadata fields so that they have enough in an export to be able to do what Daniel described, but I just wouldn't go to the effort of trying to do that for them.
Oh yeah, I wasn't necessarily suggesting that API servers should do this. Just
okay, as an import tool, I could see it being really interesting. As an export tool, I have reservations.
Yeah. There's also like other things that this doesn't necessarily do, but might make easier. Like if we wanted to define a certain subcategory of fields as important, we could like predefine managed fields potentially. Question in chat. Are we tracking the traceability for API machinery? I am tracking it. I'm arguing with the author in the KEP at the moment. I don't know about the rest of the SIG.
I saw, Smith, your comments on the, like, one of the member from Google who wrote like and added that like the ID to inject the, I hope that's a Jagger. Is it Jagger implementation into that? No, right? It's a different way to traceability. So I was kind of like trying to understand that given a release of like 1.20 or maybe next, so are we tracking in the perspective of like which release we will be going with that, or just like in general, just we are tracking whenever it will complete and whenever the next release will be, we will just go over with?
So this is that same guy that presented to us before, Daniel, right? About, and one of the mechanisms was like trying to have an annotation on resources to stitch things. So that didn't require any action on our part.
Right. And I'm fine with, their annotations. You can do whatever you want with them. But the proposal has since then, like in the last couple of days, changed to suggest adding a field specifically for this in object meta, which I'm arguing against because
-1. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm arguing against that.
Also, I have a big -1 against the whole idea of applying distributed tracing to the Kubernetes control plane. It's just a fundamental mismatch.
Yes.
Distributed tracing is based on the paradigm of procedure calls, and the Kubernetes control plane is not built out of procedure calls.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think what he put together is useful, but not quite the same thing. And I don't know that I want to bless it with an object meta field. I suggested some alternative thing there that I think makes more sense to me, at least.
So on a side note, though, I would expect distributed tracing to work with every single one of our procedural extension APIs in the whole platform. So I think that's we should take to SIG Arch and require that for every extension interface. Like, I'm unhappy right now that CNI is a shell execution. CNI should really be a gRPC endpoint, but that's like a whole different issue. But we should at least suggest a couple of these, like as the tracing, there should be a trace identifier for everything from the point of a procedural call all the way down.
Yeah,
right. Everything that is procedural, yes.
What would make sense to me is like a client sends a trace ID, we echo that back to all webhooks that get called from that. If the webhooks themselves make reentrant calls, that goes along, right? Like that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so
that doesn't require, I guess you said the same, it doesn't require an object meta field. Like that's just
No, that's like you pass it along in a header or something.
Yeah, and generally I have always liked to have at least two, so I could chain them down. So I could have like subspheres.
Okay.
Yeah, past history, but yeah. That way, like parallel calls track back correctly, and you can have them branch and rejoin. But yeah, not object meta. At least.
Couldn't they create a trace kind that they can record all the traces and link them to objects? So they won't save it to the object, but they create the traces on their own.
I don't have any objection if someone adds an annotation, but I wouldn't add a field, and it's not necessary for doing things like when you issued this call, how many, like, did it go to these webhooks? How much did the webhooks cost you in your latency flow? Which is like the sort of question that I commonly want to answer. It's different than what something like the scheduler is trying to answer, where the scheduler wants to answer questions about like, what did I use to make a decision about where this pod should go? That's a very commonly asked question, but I think it's a different problem domain.
Yeah, cross-component boundaries for object propagation in a reconciling system are kind of weird. However, I will say this has come up in SIG Node recently, which is SIG Node. There's a fundamental bug in the kubelet that we have completely missed for like 5 years, which was we use patch because the kubelet owns status, but the kubelet tries to do a live get to go get the state of that before it creates the patch. Unfortunately, that's horribly flawed because a live get doesn't guarantee anything with regards to a patch immediately following it, because patches stomp overwrites. It just means you have a shorter time window to race.
No, you could
yeah.
if you're sending the right kind of patch, you can make arbitrary precondition checks. So.
Well, you can make arbitrary precondition checks, but that would effectively be a precondition on every field in status, which kind of defeats the purpose of patch. And anyway, like, so
it depends. You can test arbitrary subfields with JSON patches.
Right, by defining an object that's larger than the patch itself in the precondition. So like our patches for every operation we do would go from being like a single patch to the exact content we expect, which really isn't what we're trying to do anyway.
No. You can. There's an actual test. You can only select on the fields that you are worried about.
Right, but that's hundreds of fields.
If you're changing hundreds of fields, then it's not clear that you should be using a patch.
But you okay, so let's not legislate that aspect of it. That's an even more fundamental change. And there was a reason for doing that, which is the kubelet does own the state, and it doesn't care if someone tries to update status that the kubelet owns, it's going to patch it. What it is trying to do now, which is kind of wrong, is it's behind the times, and it tries to do a live get to bring itself up to speed because it's inherently delayed in a distributed system, but it has no real way of understanding if someone else has gone and edited underneath it, which brought up the discussion of a status generation. So I'm not proposing that yet, but I wanted folks here who, if they have any other use cases where status generation might make sense, because we hit this a lot in controllers and we have observed generation, but we don't actually have any record of what the status when you wrote it. So there's a proto proposal, which is going to talk about a whole bunch of issues in this distributed sync loop for controllers.
Yeah, okay.
It's very relevant to this group.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And it's actually something similar came up with deployment. And I think this may have been one of the issues that fed into the API expression working group creation. But people, basically the generation does the right thing, but it includes the wrong set of fields for some people's use cases.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to let people say, like, I want a generation that just covers like the template aspect of a deployment, then like you can imagine the fully general version of that feature request would include the ability to add a generation number for like particular subsets of the status.
Yep, and I think this could be a generic solution. There's definitely some improvements, but it just highlights how hard it is to get controllers right. And so this group should care a lot about that. So I definitely didn't want it to go. I will let this SIG know when we start to pull that together, because there's a lot of super low hanging fruit that'll dramatically improve kubelet reporting. But we haven't even started picking it because like some of the fundamentals need some subtle reasoning.
Also, I have some thoughts that would involve generation numbers on subsets of spec.
I think that might be worth writing down instead of just trying to dive right into here. I mean,
I was not proposing we do so here. I just kind of a heads up. I think the idea of being able to have a generation maintained on, whatever a subset of fields the controller designers need, or the object type designers want, I think it's not just limited to status. That's all. I like the general idea.
One thing about the tracing, I haven't followed the recent development, but one thing that felt weird to me was persisting the trace ID in an annotation, or persisting it at all, because there's multiple traces, like people change the object a lot. So I don't know if that's addressed, but that's why I suggested recording traces in a separate instance.
Well, you stumbled on the fundamental problem here. Traces don't merge, but in the Kubernetes control plane, if causes and effects merge.
Yeah, it seems like there's actually a lot of energy about the tracing idea. So maybe it'd be good if those of us who've expressed opinions made another pass over the cap.
Yeah, I was a big fan when it was presented. I'm just not sure about the persistence.
Yeah, I mean, you hear the people who are really excited about it are people like Scheduler. where there's been a lot of problems over the years with like, why did the scheduler decide to do this, or why hasn't it done that? And that's where I've heard people want this tracing. It's not clear to me that that's going to be a better outcome than finding some better way to represent scheduler outcomes. But
yeah. Okay, phrase it different. I'm not opposed to persisting traces. I'm opposed to persisting one trace in the object itself. That's because there's many.
I think that is the. I think Mike, myself, you, and somebody else have all expressed variations on that concern. I think it's the same root cause.
I put a link to the KEF in the meeting notes, so just in case, if you're interested, you can go there, as Daniel suggested.
Oh, I did too.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, if we got no further topics, maybe we should give everybody 13 minutes back.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It was a good meeting, good discussion. See you.
Bye-bye.
Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye.